Hello there, and welcome to LoreDive, where we look into and analyze the stories behind all of our favorite video games. Today we are going into the latest chapter for Dead by Daylight, The Binding of Kin, with its new survivor, Elodie Rakoto, and new killers, the twins. Elodie Rakoto, the occult investigator. Born into a lush Parisian household, Elodie Rakoto grew up in a comfortable home miles away from the verdant island of Madagascar, her parents' birthplace. Her backpack was always heavy and usually contained no schoolwork. She carried the essentials, a few history books, some printed maps, and a compact shovel. Instead of wasting away with regurgitated facts from her classes, she explored the city to discover the stories behind each statue, neighborhood, and street sign. She collected bits and pieces of Paris, making it her own. When she was 14, her parents took her to Dyer Island for a business trip. To her grand disappointment, the island was a private site for exclusive members of the Imperiati. She was forced to attend pretentious and awkward social mixers daily. After a few weeks on the island, she met the pariahs, like-minded teenagers who had no interest in being pawns for their parents' political chessboard. On dull, rainy nights, she would convince them to sneak out and explore the island unsupervised. One foggy evening, they stumbled upon an abandoned internment camp. Felix, one of the pariahs, didn't want to go in, but Elodie insisted. Inside, they found a strange underground laboratory in ruins. The pariahs grew excited, browsing through the strange apparatuses for trophies and mementos. But Elodie noticed something on the far left corner of the wall, odd scratches in the shape of a circle. She ran her fingernails against the cool concrete. The marks were deep and narrow. A warm whisper suddenly sent her mind adrift. Deep rumbling thunder, an ashen, sanded beach. Incomplete. She was compelled to touch the ice-cold sand and draw a circle with a line in the middle. A sharp thunderclap and lightning whipped the sky. The ground shook as sleek obsidian claws tore through the concrete floor, ripping the earth open. The building began to collapse, and Elodie spotted her mother wielding a bizarre instrument, while her father told her to run. Then, complete darkness. Elodie never saw her parents again. For years, this nightmare woke her in the middle of the night, cold, sweating, shaking like a leaf. As a child, she suffered from night terrors and often resisted going to bed. To soothe her mind, her grandma would light a tea candle and tell her stories until the wick extinguished in a hot pool of liquefied wax. The perfume of the warm, vanilla-scented wax would lull Elodie to sleep as she envisioned stories of legendary heroes defeating fear and foes. Elodie had forgotten the stories, but she still remembered her longing for the verdant Malagasy rainforests and colossal mountains that her grandmother described. When Elodie felt cold and numb with grief, she would use a vanilla-scented candle and summon her childhood memories of this distant, idyllic place, raising her spirits to rise above her crippling depression. 14 years later, Elodie still searched for the missing pieces of the puzzle. No rational explanation could explain her parents' disappearance, so she had been looking elsewhere. She researched any and all legends that mentioned a dark force that snatched people at night without trace. From there, she translated old tales and built a tapestry of narratives from around the world that corroborated the uncanny way her parents had vanished on Dyer Island. She also gathered artifacts made by ancient civilizations who sought to destroy or resurrect the incomprehensible and indescribable thing that took her parents. There were various names for it, differing from one language to the next. The abyss, the infinite, the whole. Her findings pushed her further into the dark field of occultism. The pariahs were long gone. She'd alienated them with her theories, but she refused to give up on her parents. Elodie had to set out into the cold, misty evening. She turned a corner, leaving Paris's 13th arrondissement, an eccentric neighborhood with a substantial library dating from the Middle Ages. She had pressing work to do for Hazra Shah, the Collector, an occult specialist who archived rare artifacts. He'd recruited her after she'd salvaged a rare stolen Maori statue of spidery fangs like claws she'd seen on Dyer Island. For the next 5 years, Elodie had been procuring occult relics for the Collector. In exchange, he provided large sums of money, equipment, and precise information about obscure manuscripts. Just as the Collector requested, she had secured the annals of a witch trial convicting a mother birthing conjoined twins in the 17th century. According to legend, an occult incantation was engraved on a set of skulls, all of which the Collector possessed, except one, the witch's skull. There were no traces of where the skull was now, but Elodie had found a newspaper article dating back to the same year, mentioning that most remains had been relocated to the catacombs to avoid a pandemic. Elodie was acting on a hunch. Breaking into the catacombs to retrieve a lost skull involved certain risks, but no more than the previous work she'd done for the Collector. With a flashlight, she followed the ancient layout of the catacombs and spotted a collapsed wall. A few large stones blocked the way. Working for the Collector had its perks. The brick mortar had been poorly mixed, showing traces of sand. The whole thing was brittle, and the ground was moist from the damp evening air. This was her way in. The journey beneath was long and treacherous. The air was heavy and moldy. She gasped when her keychain flashlight hit an endless wall of bleached white skulls. Something cracked behind her. She spun around and collided headfirst with a baseball bat. Pain exploded in her skull and darkness filled her view. When she came back to, a man was carrying her over his shoulder, venturing deeper inside the catacombs. He was wearing a dark robe. The black veil. She'd managed to elude them until now. Ruthless and lethal, they went by many names. She'd figured out that they ultimately all worked for the same group, a ring of occult fanatics rumored to perform human sacrifices for what they called the Old One. She had to get out of there, fast. Elodie spotted a loose skull on the wall, grabbed it, and smashed it on her assaulter's head. Stunned, the man lost his balance and Elodie hit the ground running. As she turned a corner, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her side. She looked down and saw a large blade planted there. Shocked, she removed the knife and warm blood spurted out. Her heartbeat rang in her ears and her vision blurred. She fell to her knees. Summoning all of her strength, she drew a circle on the ground with a shaking, blood-red finger and traced a line in the middle. An opaque heaviness fell over her shoulders. A familiar scent of vanilla, spiked fruits, and lychee nuts coated the air. Thin, tropical rain drizzled down on leafy vines. Warmth. Madagascar. A ghostly cry erupted from the thick foliage. Elodie looked up and the vines turned into hissing snakes. The soft canopy soil suddenly turned ashen and collapsed under her feet. She sank into something dense and cold that swallowed her like quicksand. She screamed before being smothered by the abyss, the infinite, the whole. She found what she had been searching for. Elodie's first perk is appraisal. Elodie has a careful eye that notices what many overlook. With this perk, Elodie starts the trial with 3 tokens. After a chest has already been opened, Elodie can consume 1 token to search it again for another. Along with this, searching chests becomes faster than normal. Elodie's second perk is deception. Her adventurous lifestyle requires moments of crafty misdirection. When Elodie interacts with a locker while holding the sprint button, she can trigger a loud noise notification for the killer at her location instead of entering the locker. Afterwards, she will not leave any scratch marks for 3 seconds. Elodie's final perk is power struggle. Elodie's never given up, and she's not going to start now. While Elodie is being carried by the killer, reaching a certain percentage wiggle threshold activates power struggle. While Power Struggle is active, you can drop a nearby standing pallet to stun the killer and be released. Power Struggle is deactivated for the rest of the match if it is triggered successfully. Elodie and Felix, two former members of the Pariahs, have now made their way into the entity's realm. Could this be coincidence, or is there something much darker that draws them together? Charlotte and Victor Dei, the twins. A pair of conjoined twins, Charlotte and Victor Dei, formed an emotional bond like none other. The unlikeliness of their successful birth in the 17th century could be described as miraculous, yet immediately it brought about their life of persecution. The twins emerged with Victor's lower body affixed into the chest of his sister, legs twisted around her muscles and organs. He was smaller than Charlotte, grown as if he were an appendage to her body rather than a fully formed boy. As the newborns screeched, so too did the midwife who delivered them, running from the home, yelling of a demon birthed by a witch. So began the hunting of Charlotte, Victor, and their mother, Madeline. The coming years were fleeting memories for the twins, yet they were the closest thing to a normal life they would know. The journey with their mother was what they believed all children underwent, the games of running and hiding through France's countryside being an ordinary occurrence. At the age of 5, a new challenge to the game was presented as their mother fell ill. Pale and exhausted, Madeline had no choice but to pass responsibility of collecting food onto Charlotte. The girl, burdened under extra clothing that concealed Victor's protruding body, set out from their forest tent and marched to the nearby town. Though a peculiar sight, she did what she had been trained for, waiting for an opening at the market and swiping whatever food she could. It was a victory in the game, but a short-lived one. After midnight, glowing flames surrounded the family's encampment, bobbing through the darkness. A single commanding shout broke the night's silence, and a mob of witch hunters streamed in. Grubby hands tore the twins from their bed, Charlotte frantically kicking all who approached. Madeline cried for her children, her voice abruptly silenced by a club to her skull. Victor shrieked, the wailing of a trapped rat. The hunters coordinated quickly. A judge on hand declared Madeline guilty of witchcraft, evidenced by her demon spawn. Within minutes, they shackled her unconscious body to a tree, surrounding her feet with dry twigs and moss. As she awoke, she did not struggle and only begged for her children to turn away. They would not be given such a choice. The twins were forced to watch as the torch was lit, as the flames leapt up their mother's skirt, charring and sizzling her flesh. They watched as fat dripped from her body, and her face bubbled and twisted. They watched until the screams that tore her vocal cords were no more, and all that was left was the cracking of embers and a nauseating stench. Whatever joy and goodness were in them died with their mother. Caged and transported to an old wooden temple, they were sold to a secretive group clad in dark cloaks. Victor reacted with the ferocity of a rabid beast at any who approached, clawing and biting. The only solace that could calm him was the embrace of his sister. Charlotte, bitter and hateful to all but her brother, found purpose in being his protector. Within the temple, they were exposed to unusual experiments, some cruel, many simply baffling. One day, they would be made to break the neck of a small gray bird. The next, they would bleed their fingers into a vase of roses. Every 7th day, they would sleep with the branch of a damp oak beneath their pillow. Then there was the chanting, a never-ending chorus from cloaked figures on scheduled intervals. In time, a final experiment was planned. 2 robed figures herded the twins to the center of the temple, holding Charlotte upon an altar in a room lit with candelabras. The wrinkled face of a man peered from under his hood, placing a hand on the forehead of each twin, making careful examination of their skulls. "Memento mori," he uttered, as he withdrew a shining blade. Charlotte rolled to her side, shifting her brother off the altar. With a screech, he stretched his arms out as far as he could, knocking a candelabra to the ground. The flames took to the dry wood immediately. They swept over the floor, igniting the black robes that brushed against it. Screams of agony pierced the chaos, invigorating Charlotte. She dashed through the inferno, visions concealed with nothing but black smoke and blazing flame. A painful heaviness filled her lungs. No exit could be found, every step leading to overwhelming heat. She fell to her knees, suffocating, and then she saw it. Sunlight. Trees. She stumbled from the fire into dewy grass, and without looking back, she ran into the forest until she collapsed. When Charlotte opened her eyes, she reached for Victor's hand. He made no attempt to budge. His body hung helplessly from her torso. She clasped his face, staring into his sad, still eyes. The movements she was accustomed to, his body pulling at her skin, his legs prodding at the cavity in her chest, were no more. Victor was dead. Charlotte had no choice but to continue moving on as she mourned, fearing black cloaks and witch hunters were prowling. She concealed her brother's corpse under her clothing and marched for the sewers of a nearby city. There she set up camp, emerging often to steal whatever food she could, resorting to raiding barns for pig slop when desperation set in. Throughout the years, Victor's corpse rotted as his limbs oozed and blackened. Yet, his body demonstrated resistance to complete decomposition, as if his sister's blood still coursed through him. Protecting his lifeless body became Charlotte's sole reason for being, refusing to ever be separated from the only family she had left. Life in her teenage years was a game of survival. Her hatred for humanity grew each day under the realization that they would never leave her be. No matter how many died during her botched robberies and desperate attempts to escape, there would always be more to pursue and sling words of condemnation at her. Monster, demon, witch. And it was the Black Cloaks who were the worst of them. Their hunt for her was unending, forcing her to constantly abandon shelter and run. For years, Charlotte fled, drawing blood out of necessity, cradling her long-dead brother in the night. During a frigid winter, her body began to break down. Food was scarce, and the refuge of rickety shacks were no use against the freezing temperatures. Sickle in hand, she sheltered near her campfire in the woods, not knowing if the Black Cloaks would take her before the cold did. As frost crystallized around her nostrils and her lips took on a gentle blue hue, Charlotte felt something she had never experienced: acceptance. She closed her eyes, opening herself to the serenity of death, when a shriek, shrill and vicious, pierced her ears. Victor spasmed and flailed from her chest, a cloud of fog encompassing him. Before she could react, he spilled from her in a bloody puddle, landing on the snow and running. Pulling herself from the edge of death, she gave chase. Calling out his name, she ran through the forest until her legs could hardly carry her, until finally, within her view, was Victor, sitting at the edge of a thick fog, his face, twisted and feral, screamed as a dark hooded figure emerged from the fog, grabbing his arm and seizing him. The serenity that had crept into Charlotte was extinguished, replaced with the seething hatred and rage she had depended on for so long. With a tight grip on her sickle, she charged into the fog, prepared to eviscerate any who set foot near her brother. The twins' special ability is Blood Bond. Though forever bound through blood and trauma, the twins have been granted the power to separate from their shared body. Together, they hunt as brother and sister, doubling the threat to survivors. When using this ability as Charlotte, it allows her to unleash Victor, swapping control from Charlotte to him, and causing her to fall into a dormant state. Victor is unable to see scratch marks, but he will see any pools of blood in a bright red. When using the ability as Victor, you will regain control of Charlotte again. Any survivors moving around Victor at this time will cause Charlotte's killer instinct to notice their current location. While Charlotte acts as any normal killer, Victor gains a special attack called Pounce. While controlling Victor, you can charge Pounce and then tap Attack to unleash it. Successfully landing a Pounce deals damage to the survivor. If the survivor was at full health, Victor will latch onto them, giving them the Broken, Oblivious, and Incapacitated status effect. Afterwards, control will immediately swap back to Charlotte. If the survivor was injured, Victor will instead down them, and control will not go back to Charlotte automatically. While Victor is latched onto a survivor, they will be unable to enter lockers, leave through the exit gates, and will reveal the aura of all nearby survivors. The afflicted survivor can crush Victor while he's latched onto them by completing the remove action. Doing so will cause Victor to despawn from the map, but after a short amount of time, he will respawn again within Charlotte's chest. If Victor misses his Pounce, or isn't being controlled by the player, he can also be crushed by any nearby survivor. The twins' first perk is Hoarder. Charlotte protects what little she has, and she's perceptive to those rummaging around her stockpiles. With it, Charlotte receives a loud noise notification for 4 seconds when survivors interact with a chest or pick up an item within a certain distance of her location. A side effect to this is that the trial begins with 2 additional chests in the environment. The twins' second ability is Oppression. Life has been difficult for Victor and Charlotte, so they'll make it difficult for others. When Charlotte damages a generator, up to 3 other random generators will also begin regressing. If the affected generator is currently being repaired, any survivors repairing them will receive a difficult skill check. After oppression has been used, it will go on cooldown for a long duration. The twins' final perk is Coup de grace. As the end nears, Charlotte goes in for the kill. Each time a generator is completed, Coup de grace is granted 1 token. With this token, Charlotte can increase the distance of her next lunge by a certain percentage. The twins undoubtedly had a hard life growing up. This life has led to their distrust of all people and has resulted in them both being easily manipulated by the entity's nefarious ends. That's it for this episode of LoreDive. I hope you enjoyed it. Special thanks again to Jack Freeman for supporting me on Patreon. If you would like to support me there as well, you can do so using the link below. If you can't, or simply don't want to support me that way, that's also perfectly fine. Liking this video and subscribing if you haven't already also helps me in the long run. Now that my computer is no longer broken, I'll be able to work on all my projects again, which is good, because I'll actually be able to provide content. Hey! I've got my next What If chapter coming out soon, as well as a few other videos that are coming down the pipeline, and I hope you'll enjoy them all. With that being said, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.